Okay, welcome back to the tutorial series for the Runtime Spawner package. In the first video, we created a sample scene, we generated a nav mesh for it, and we also set up a player and a zombie with a simple nav mesh agent to wander around. So if I run around here, that's our third person character, and the zombie's set up with his animations. Okay, so let's add the runtime spawner into the system. So I'm gonna look at the zombie. We have the prefab of the zombie created, so I can just delete it from the scene. And now we can add the runtime spawner itself, which you can do by right-clicking in the scene view, going to runtime spawner, and then you can just choose this full stack version. It will ask to save a settings file, which lets you configure some of the colors. And that's the runtime spawner. The full stack version also adds the spawn director and special encounter manager, but they're optional. And at its core, really, the runtime spawner is just a component you can add on any game object. There's nothing fancy about the setup. So let's go through the different foldouts for options here. So let's look at global settings. So you can see there's a couple things for the player setup. There's this concept of the factory, and then we get into more configuration for the actual spawning. So to set up the player, I'll drag the player object into there. And I'll also check auto launch on start. That will start the spawner when we hit play. The spawner can also find the character from the player tag. So if you have your player tagged as player, it can automatically find it. You can also set it from script. The next thing is the factory. You can see it says no factory assigned. So the factory basically is the internal system for how it spawns the objects. It also manages the object pooling so that we do efficient spawning and recycling. And it is different for offline single player versus, say, Fusion or Photon Pun networking stacks. So we're in single player, so I can just click single player factory. We'll save that. And there's nothing to configure on the factory itself. It's just an internal system that tells the spawner how we're going to spawn the objects. Okay, so the next thing is the world extent. So this tells the spawner how big your world is and what should it factor in when it's spawning. And if I click show, you can see it gives us the general bounds of the map. You can see our level is larger, so I'm just going to increase this to 200 by 200. And then I'll hide it. Now, the way that the spawner works is it has essentially a bubble or a interest area around the player. It factors in the player's location, and you can configure how far away do you want things to spawn. You don't want enemies to spawn right beside the player, for example. So this minimum spawn range defines how far away things are allowed to spawn. So if you have it say 25, that's 25 units away. So you don't want things popping in too close. You can control sort of the min distance they can spawn. On the other side, you also don't want enemies to be processing and running if they're super far away from the player. So that's the culling system down on the bottom here. And if I click preview here, you can see sort of the default 100 unit, 100 meter culling range, which for a map like this is quite large. You can see if I'm in this room here, I might be able to see a room or maybe two over. So let's lower it from 100 to say, I don't know, 35, maybe 40. So any enemy units or any spawned units outside of this sphere will be recycled by the system and just keeps things running efficiently. You don't want an enemy to be running way across the map when the player can't see them. There's no chance of seeing them and so on. The last piece is the spawner tag. So when the enemy or whatever you're spawning is spawned, you can optionally give it a tag. For example, enemy, if your other scripts look for tagged tags. And that's it for the global settings. The global settings also apply to whether you're using a global spawner, a wave spawner, an area spawner. So just be aware that you do need to configure this stuff no matter what spawner type you're using. And if I open up the global spawners, for example, global spawners are, you can think of it as just like ambient spawned characters. So this could be just like your idle zombies that are wandering around a map, say in Left 4 Dead. They aren't the horde that gets triggered in a wave. They aren't specific zombies that appear in certain areas. This would be just your ambient zombies. Now we'll specify what layer we want them to spawn on, so I'll just pick everything for right now. And there's also a restrict to nav mesh areas. So if you generate a map with multiple nav mesh areas, for example, if I look in the AI navigation areas, right now we have walkable, not walkable, jump. You can restrict your AI to only walk on certain or only spawn in certain areas. So you could actually mark certain surfaces for where the spawners are, for example. Now, specific to the global spawners, there's also this min and max object count. So this would be what's your overall population of ambient spawned elements or objects. So I'll set this to say, 25 to 35. So again, this is not control, for example, how many spawn in a region or a wave. This is purely the ambient ones. So it's almost like the filler zombies in it, to use that example. The last thing we need to reference here is the global spawners. So this is actually how you tell the system what you want to spawn. So if I click the plus button, you can see that it's looking for a spawn entry. Now the spawn entry is kind of the standard way you tell the runtime spawner what prefabs you want to spawn. So these can be created. You can either click the create button here, or in your project, you can right click, go to create runtime spawner, and it's located under profiles. So you can see create spawn entry. So the spawn entry again references a prefab that you want to spawn. So we've got our zombie, so I'll drag my zombie in there. Now, one other thing regarding sort of population management, because once you start having multiple spawners, you're trying to manage how many of each type is spawning. So each spawn entry has a population. So in this case, there can be only 100 zombies max. Even if your other systems are trying to spawn more, this will be the cap of this type of spawned zombie. Now, the global spawners, which is one of the spawner types, has this min and max object count. Now, this is specific to the global spawner. At the top level, under global settings, there's a max global population. So this is set to 100. So for example, if I set this to 10, it would override the global object count. It would override the max population. This basically tells the system how many overall objects do you want to spawn. So this is almost like you can tweak this for like performance and so on. So I'm going to leave that to 100, and I'll leave the global to 35. Or 25 to 35, and then I'll leave the spawn entry at its default 100, and let's give a try and see what happens. So again, we're going to leave the max global population. We'll set it back to the default, which is 100. On the global spawner, we'll set the min max to 25, 35. And then our spawn entry will be 100. Now the last thing we need to do is actually point the global spawner at our spawn entry, so it knows which object to spawn. And then we can click create or run, and we should see the object spawning. So you can see in the map here, we've got our zombies spawning. And if I go back to the global spawner and turn on the culling window here, you can see when objects get out of the area, they will be culled and recycled, so it maintains the population inside the main area. Now the animations aren't playing, so I'm going to pause and take a look and see what's going on there. Alright, never mind, I forgot to add the animation script to the zombies. So let's add the animation script to the zombies, and then they'll animate. Okay, so again, we have our global spawner enabled. I've created a spawn entry to point at the prefab. I've set the layer mask. I've told it which player it's using, and let's give it a test. So I'm going to turn on the preview for the culling range, so you can actually see the area that the zombies will spawn. And you can see if they go outside of this range, they will be recycled back into the pool. Let's find one who's going to run out. Yeah, it looks like he will. Yeah. So what this does is maintains the desired population within the culling range. So as the player moves around, you'll see the window shift, and any of the spawned items outside of that area will get recycled. And then it frees up spawners to appear around the player still. Okay, so that's it for the basic runtime spawner setup. So again, under global settings, we've got it set to auto launch on start. We pointed it at the player. We've configured the min spawn range and the culling distance so that they kind of match. In fact, mine are pretty close, so I'm going to actually adjust it to say 15 and 40. We've set the global population for the overall from all the spawn types at 100. And then under the global spawner section, we created a spawn entry and we're referencing the prefab from the spawn entry. So that's it for setting up the runtime spawner and its global settings. The next video will look at region spawning, which is like area biome type spawning. And we'll see you in the next video.